This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. We're fast upon a provincial election, and the Premier is quick to tell us that right at the top of her list of values are families. Of course, we just survived the first Family Day in British Columbia. But what does that really mean? Do we put our money where our mouths are? Not necessarily. Tim Agg is the Executive Director of PLEA Community Services here in BC, has been for a great many years, a wonderful agency, and he recently wrote a terrific op-ed piece in The Sun saying, look, we cannot keep cutting back on the kinds of things that help disenfranchised and threatened people in our neighborhoods. And he's afraid that that's what we've been experiencing. Tim, great to see you here this morning. Thank you so much. This is a terrific piece in the paper.
Thank you.
Yeah, I loved it. Tell me about some of the kinds, well, first of all, let's talk about PLEA. Just explain to everybody what PLEA is and what it does, because it's a great organization.
PLEA is a nonprofit social service agency that has worked in the Lower Mainland for 30-odd years. 1982, exactly.
Yeah.
We deliver a variety of programs. I think from a kind of public perspective, the program that we're most well known for is the Kids Start Mentoring program, which is our wonderful preventive services.
Yeah.
But we do a lot of other work with young people and adults who are facing serious challenges in their lives. And we're simply one of a very large network of community-based agencies and organizations spread around the province on whose behalf I wrote the op-ed article.
And one of the lovely things about PLEA is that it's one of those organizations that has quietly been doing good in communities for years. We don't read a lot about it. You guys don't have parades. You don't toot your horn a lot. But day after day, you've got frontline workers who are working with kids at risk, who are working with seniors who need a bit of help, with families that are disintegrating and so on. You don't pat yourselves on the back a lot, but you ought to, because you do good work.
I think that the people who we work with know that we do good work. I think most days the people who pay the bills know that we do good work. There's often, particularly when some of your programs are involved in helping people who have been marginalized to reconnect and reestablish and become healthy and safe in the community. Maintaining a low profile is a good way of helping. In fact, helping.
Yeah.
And so we prefer that approach. We don't need to blow the horn too much. But again, we are but one of many, and my reason for the op-ed article and my reason for being happy to join you today is that I've been part of a group that's been working province-wide with a network of similar community service organizations who are every bit as much as we are performing just tremendous service and vital services for
youth
British
justice,
Columbians.
child welfare, addictions, health, mental health, community living, education systems, residential, non-residential services, and so on.
Domestic violence programs, alternate dispute resolution, parent-teen mediation, that list goes on and on and on.
So these are issues of the family, and we have a family premier, but you are saying that frozen budgets and cuts to budgets have been consistent over the last 10 years or so, and they're not even keeping up with inflation.
Yeah, I think we get very concerned that that we often are perceived to be caught in the squeeze between the demands of the health system and the demands of the education system.
Oh, yes.
And we're kind of in the middle there, and increasingly important to both. And the concern that we are wanting to kind of raise in kind of public awareness is a simple one of don't forget us, because increasingly the services that we deliver province-wide are vital to families, but also vital to how communities at large function, and frankly, increasingly supportive to the health and education systems.
I think one of the indicators of that, Tim, is the way addictions, for example, has wandered from one ministry file to another over many years. You know, 1 year addictions are part of health. Next year it's part of the Attorney General's or the Solicitor General's department. Next year it belongs to education.
If I can be kind of completely nonpartisan or multipartisan, I suppose, and observe over the 30 years I've been in the social services business, we have come to a place where the community sector, the community service sector, much more than government, is the place you go to for continuity. And because the habit of government restructurings and reassigning responsibilities for various programs to various ministries and creating new programs and new funding streams and all that stuff, life becomes for us incredibly more complicated. But at the end of the day, it's organizations like us which are actually delivering.
It's very funny. It's tragic, but funny that often, I mean, it's government's just doing this to show that they're doing something, but it ends up with the same bureaucracies, the same people change phone numbers, they move down the hall and so on, but it's business as usual in a sense.
I think, you know, it's hard to, I don't live in the political world, and I don't think I want to. So sometimes those decisions kind of, the wisdom eludes me. I think it does make sense to them at the end of the day. But what is really important for, I think, the public to know is that at the end of the road, those services are very often, most often, delivered in their community by frontline workers who are their neighbors, and who are doing high quality work, and often kind of getting left behind a bit.
Well, give us a practical example, and if you can, quote a couple of dollars and cents of one program that you see, for example, that you love, you're fond of, you think it does good work, but you see budgets frozen, or you can't hire another worker, or give me an example of that. Without harming anybody.
And I think one of the examples that I would turn to would be that there are in a very specialized area there are significant needs across the province for programs to assist young people with fetal alcohol syndrome, other organic brain injuries.
Right.
And you know, we could double or triple capacity overnight if the resources.
What do we do? See, I know very little about fetal alcohol syndrome. So what do we do in response to that matter? Not enough.
Not enough. Those kind of challenges, I think, are significant for us to pay attention to, because we're in an area of kind of new science, new research, new evolving knowledge around how to help kids more effectively learn when you've got an organic brain injury, for example. And keeping up is difficult, and having the freedom and the resources to be trying new techniques, to be trying new strategies, takes some money.
Also, what can you do with kids who live in rural areas or outlying areas? I know that some people are trying to do creative things like hook a kid up to a counselor. The counselor may be in Burnaby and the kid may be in Vanderhoof, and so they're communicating on Skype. Better than nothing, I guess. but it's a start.
It would also be true in many smaller communities that there are some limited community-based services available, and it wouldn't take a huge amount to better resource them to provide some of those services locally. If I can flip to a kind of totally different kind of example,
sure.
And it's the big one. It's not one I'm an expert on, but in recent months we've seen some articles written by Paul Kershaw at UBC, who is making a very compelling case for a major national social investment in childcare and early learning as a way of heading off at the pass very expensive issues downstream. You know, if you can
getting kids engaged young, real young,
and head off at the pass some of the challenges that we know are often can be identified and often are identified in the early days. You know, locking a teenager up in youth custody for years, you know, over $200,000.
Yeah.
So part of our message is one that says in the country and certainly in BC that spending some targeted money now means you're going to pay less later.
And what does that speak directly to daycare?
It speaks directly to daycare. It speaks directly to a variety of early childhood development programs. We certainly see it. I can tell you that in my organization, young people who are able to take advantage of the Kids Start Mentoring program when they're in their elementary school years, really good chance we don't see them showing up in some of our teenage programs later on.
If guys like you and me have to bust out of our own bubble, why do you think a lot of people listening to this will say, "Oh, that's a bunch of foofra. That's just frills. We don't need to spend that kind of money"?
I think there's a number of reasons. I think if you turn the clock back, you're looking at programs and services which, when I started out, were very experimental, hadn't proved themselves. I think we're now at the point where the research literature is starting to sort of give us the compelling conclusions that tell us what works well and what doesn't. And I think we're also in our sector, I think, beginning to kind of slowly gather the voice together that says, look, society, it's time to do that kind of investing and use the word investing properly and not simply spending, because we're getting the payoff.
It's interesting that we're at a point, I don't know if we've always been at this point historically, but we're at a point where common sense will not be enough. I mean, we may be able to look and say, you know, that's just good common sense, but politicians more than ever want the evidence. They want to be able to say to their constituents and their voters, look, this is scientifically so.
And I think where it's been difficult for politicians is the evidence that says if you spend $1 today, you'll save $7 in 20 years.
Well, I mean,
it's really nice to hear Barack Obama say that, which he did at the State of the Union address.
Yes.
But it's hard to take hold, and it's hard to keep at it at a time when there's just huge pressure to deal with those classrooms, to deal with the acute care hospitals, to deal with the other much more crisis-driven demands. And I think partly for what we're saying is that if you look really closely in our system, failure to invest wisely and early means you are providing crisis-level services.
Good note on which to take a quick breather. Give a chance for you to send a note to davidberner.com, and for the nice folks who support us here to say hello. They're wonderful in supporting the airing of this program here on Shaw Community Television Cable 4. We'll be back in just a moment.
This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC.
We're talking with Tim Agg, who's the Executive Director of PLEA, Community Services Society here in Vancouver. He has a lengthy track record in the province serving the public, special advisor to the Attorney General on legal aid, board member of the McCurry Centre Society, BC Human Rights Coalition, and so on. You were saying before we started...
some of that dates me.
Yeah, I know, it makes you positively ancient. But you were admitting that you actually have followed in your dad's footsteps. Your dad was kind of a pioneer in these areas.
My father was a probation officer in the 1960s.
Yes.
In fact, when the city of Vancouver ran probation services,
yes.
That far back. He was instrumental in creating some of the first community-based alternatives to custody in the youth justice system anywhere in Canada.
I think we met.
You probably did meet him.
Because I started in 1967.
Yeah. And what is fascinating, my happening to sort of follow in his footsteps was a lovely accident, but it really was an accident. What's fascinating is that the programs that he initiated,
yes.
Which included the first programs of working one-to-one with young people on probation, those programs are not only thriving in British Columbia, not just with my organization, but others, not only thriving all these years later, but in fact helped to inform one of the elements of the current Youth Criminal Justice Act,
right.
The Intensive Support and Supervision Order,
right.
has its roots, and I think it's one of the things that is an important thing to be saying is that there have been some interesting social policy successes in this province.
Absolutely.
And I say this sort of spanning, again, multi-administrations. And youth justice is in fact one of them. BC has always had one of the most robust combinations of government-delivered custody and probation services and community agency-delivered alternatives to custody programming of any province in the country, and it's no accident that we have the lowest youth crime rate in Canada.
Yeah, sometimes we don't think so because of the exposure to the media, but in fact we do very well.
You know, I'd be the first to say it's not a perfect situation by any means, but there have been some tremendous work, and it speaks to the fact that many of the programs that our community sector represents on a daily basis work very closely in partnership with our government colleagues. So while there are things that we'd like to see improved, we also maintain a pretty cordial and close working relationship.
Absolutely, but this idea of long-term successes personified by you and your dad brings up the subject that you raised, I think, in your op-ed and has been raised on your website by you and others, and that's the problem you seem to be experiencing of long-term established funding compared to constantly shifting short-term contracts. What does that do? What does the short-term contract do to the work?
Well, it means that you can plan on a 12-month cycle. And
Only.
think about it. Governments, we worry that governments can only seem to plan on a 4-year electoral cycle.
Yes.
When you're a community-based organization looking at annual funding contracts, you're looking at best an ability to sort of plan year by year by year. What you learn to do is you plan anyway, but there is in fact
acting as if the money's going to show up.
Acting as if, it's one of the things that we share happily, I guess, or warily with the private sector. But the lack of predictability and the overly complicated administrative processes they were created about 25 years ago. They served a good purpose, I think, in their time. They've hit their, in my view, hit their best by date, and we need a conversation in the community sector and with government around what are the funding mechanisms, the financing mechanisms that are actually going to serve best over the next 10, 20 years.
If you were God for a day, what would be an optimal period? It seems to me that nobody in any business, in any enterprise, social, capitalist, can plan 10 years ahead realistically because the world changes so fast. You know, I mean, this thing is, my watch will soon be something that does everything. It almost does already. But 2 years, 5 years, 3 years?
I think I would be looking to try to do something, and I think some of this is being experimented with in governments now, to be looking at rolling 3 or 5 year plans that are updated annually, but you're always looking 3 to 5 years down the road. The advantage that the province and the citizens in BC have in this province around community-funded services is that we are very definitely driven by funding agreements that can be reduced or eliminated for poor performance, and if needs change.
Yes.
And so you want to be able to maintain that flexibility. You don't want to keep services that aren't serving a purpose anymore, or who are slipping badly.
Well, you have a very...
but you want to be able to encourage innovation. You want to be able to encourage adapting to change, at the same time providing enough stability that you're not in a constant scramble.
If you start working with a new client or a new family of clients in November, and your funding model has a cutoff at December 31st, it's very difficult to, with any assurity, tell these folks, okay, we're going to see you through until January, February, March, and here's where we're going to go, when in fact you're not quite sure if you're going to have the worker there to keep doing that.
Well, and in some cases where you're looking at, for example, very, very long-term residential services for people with significant disabilities, for example.
Yeah.
The disconnect is that, in fact, you may be looking at lifelong support. We just need to get better at kind of marrying the financing structures with the kind of realities of service. The other thing that's really important to note is that most of the sector we're talking about this morning are nonprofit charitable organizations. In addition to their government funding, they also bring in significant charitable dollars into play with services, and it's also a sector which is rich in innovation, increasingly attaching itself to the research community. And one of the things that governments need to catch up on is to find ways to be seed funding that innovation work, as well as simply the direct service work.
And I think one of the things we have to say clearly is that people who do this kind of work, this work is relative to almost anything else inexpensive. It's cheap, cheap, cheap. I don't know too many frontline workers who are driving Maseratis. It just doesn't happen very much. No. You know, people work for pretty modest incomes. You know,
incomes are very modest in our sector. In fact, incomes need to do some catching up in the coming years. But it is a sector where the motivation to help probably trumps everything else.
Absolutely.
And we have a highly motivated workforce.
And if you have $200,000, which you spoke of in the first segment of this conversation, $200,000 to keep some kid in a lockup per year, often a residential treatment center or non-residential treatment center is $25,000.
Exactly.
It's 1/10 the cost.
Exactly. Yeah. And a community one-to-one worker is a lot cheaper than that. I think that where we're finding that there really does need to be some attention to compensation is that we're finding the recruit and retain issues for our sector are increasingly problematic. Governments in particular want to steal people to work in government and in the health sector and in the better paying jobs.
Well,
it's amazing the number of people from my organization are now in government. So keeping people is increasingly a challenge. But it's also the case that the the knowledge base required to work in our sector has increased significantly, and the skill base as well. And we're going to need, as in the coming years, to make sure that compensation reflects that.
Well, I don't want to scare you, but as soon as you said about 15 minutes ago that I'm not interested in politics and I don't want to be personally, run for politics or be involved in politics, I know there are 15 people watching going, hey, he might be a good candidate. I mean, people from parties. People from parties are going, get a hold of that guy. Maybe he's just saying that.
Then let me take the opportunity.
To be very clear, as Richard Nixon would say.
I do not have the personality type to be a successful politician. So.
Thanks God.
I know where I do well.
Yeah. Tim, you do a wonderful job. Thanks so much. Yeah,
Thank
pleasure.
you. I've enjoyed speaking with you today.
Great. Okay, folks, that's it for today. Next week, Jonathan Baker, old friend, lawyer, barrister, flautist, and on Vancouver City Council for ages, ran for mayor, I think, once, didn't quite make it. A real wonderful character. Well, he's been helping Adrienne Carr have her fun skirmishes with Vancouver City Hall and with the park board, who for some reason or other don't like volunteers. They don't like community centers running their own show. They want to run it. Oh, follow the money, that old principle. Okay, thanks for being with us. We'll look forward to seeing you soon here again on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.